Welcome to Stacking Stones podcast. Hey everyone, this is Pastor Mark, and I have a friend, Michele Brewster from North Carolina with us today. Michele, would you say hello to the audience?
Hi guys.
Awesome. So if you're new to Stacking Stones podcast, we have one purpose in mind, and that's to give glory to the Lord by testifying of hearing God and or seeing his miracles. And so Michele's going to share a God moment that she had where she heard from the Lord and share a little bit of how that impacted her as well as her family. But before we do that, Michele, would you just give a little background, a little history of who you are and kind of your life and your family and a little bit of your history and ministry before we get going? Do you mind doing that first?
Sure. So my name is Michele. I have been walking with the Lord for right at 25 years now. I surrendered my life to him when I was 20 years old. I met my husband shortly after that. We'll be celebrating 23 years of marriage this year.
Awesome.
We have two beautiful children. My daughter will be 21 at the end of May, and my son will be 17 at the end of May. And they really have, outside of my relationship with the Lord and my marriage, have been the privilege of my life. I'm also very involved in students ministry. And have been for the majority of my adult life, getting to love on these kids and just provide them a free space to be messy while they're trying to figure out, just being a teenager and what that looks like, walking things out with the Lord, those kinds of things. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, would you be willing to begin? Just share a little bit about what happened, who was involved, when did this happen, what's going on?
Sure. So, going into my daughter's senior year in high school, so this involves my daughter, and I do have permission to disclose this information. I asked her first.
Good. That's always good.
And yes. But this has been the most recent huge impact, not just in her life, but also like for her dad and I and me specifically. And so that's why I wanted to share this particular one. But going into her senior year in high school, she kind of had just this time of like, I don't know if I truly believe what you guys have raised me in. Like, I've got to figure this out for myself. She did end up becoming a prodigal for about 2 years. And it ultimately ended in her being in a very toxic, unhealthy relationship with a man that was quite a few years older than her.
Okay.
She ultimately moved out on her own and then moved in with him. And all leading up to the event that happened August of last year, so that would have been 2022, they had decided they were going to take jobs at a car dealership. They both worked at a car dealership here, and they were going to take jobs in the Orlando, Florida area. And because of my concerns about their relationship, where she was, who he was, those kinds of things, I really was struggling with her moving that far away. There were just lots of different factors that went into that scenario. And ultimately what happened was about 3 days before they were moving, I really was just feeling scared, like really scared, fear, like that whole thing. And I begged her not to go. Really just kind of cried out to her, like, please don't do this, kind of thing. And she was pretty set on the fact that she was moving to Florida. This is what she wanted. She loved this man. This was, what she wanted. And,
Now, were they married?
No, just boyfriend and girlfriend. Yeah, thank you for helping me clarify that. And so, at 20 years old, what do? They're an adult. And so they're responsible for their own choices. And so the day after that, it had gotten to the point where I was just riddled with fear. And I'm not normally this way, but when it comes to my kids, sometimes like it's hard. It's hard transitioning from being, kind of the position of control when they're younger, of their schedules and like all of this stuff, to more influence. And so it was a hard transition, but really like, okay, she's going, Like, she is going, and this is all there is to it. And I was just really, really riddled with fear. And it was that next night, I had just been crying out to the Lord. I was like, God, I am genuinely scared for the safety of my daughter. I'm scared that if something were to happen, I wouldn't be able to get to her. All of these things. And I heard him very clearly say to me, she has to go. And almost instantaneously, I've only had this happen a handful of times in my walk with the Lord, but almost instantaneously, the fear was completely gone. Like, I just had peace. I just knew that this was going to be the process of things. He didn't give me anything other than she has to go.
Now, can I interrupt? Like, where were you? What was the context of hearing? Tell us a little
Sure.
bit about how you said you heard that. Like, tell me, was it was it out loud? Like, tell me a little bit more
Sure.
about that, if you don't mind, especially for
Yeah.
the listeners. Would you share a little bit more about that moment? Were you in prayer? Were
Absolutely.
you down on your knees? I mean, some
Yeah.
specificity.
So I was in my bed. I had been trying to go to sleep and I couldn't get my mind to turn off. I would,
Mm,
get overwhelmed with the thoughts of it, the fear of it, and then I would cry. And so that process for me as a believer in walking this out with the Lord always ends up in me crying out to him. Like, Lord, don't leave me here. Like, I
mm.
need you to speak truth to me, like, comfort me right now, because I am scared, and these kinds of things. And so the way that I hear the Lord, and the way that I teach people, like, I've never heard him audibly. He doesn't speak to me like the way that you and I are conversing and I hear you. Normally what that looks like for me is it will be a thought, or in my mind's eye, I'll see a word or a sentence, or
So
even
what
a
was it that night?
picture.
So what was it that
It
night?
was it was the thought. It was a thought.
Okay. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And how did
And it
you
was
know that? Like, how did you
sure,
know that was the Lord? If I can just be so blunt.
sure, absolutely. Years of practice. So, I mean, that's the best way I know how to describe that. When
Okay.
it first started happening to me,
I
um,
meant that night.
it
I meant that night. You heard it,
yeah, it was a thought that I
and
recognized as
then
his
what came with
voice.
it?
The peace. Once it started, like, once I had that thought and I knew that it was him, then the
Hmm.
peace followed that. And I knew that he was in the situation, that he had it covered, that it was good,
And then, and
or
then,
would end good.
what did you do? Like
Went
you
to
heard
sleep.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you've been wrestling, trying to go to
Yes.
sleep, worrying, fear, all these kind of things going on,
Yes.
and she has to go, which is interesting because that's not your desire. Like, you did not want her to go, correct?
Correct.
But hearing God say she has to go, you just released. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. It was just
Okay.
the turmoil that was happening inside of me just stopped. And I was able to put my head on my pillow and go to sleep.
So I think that's fascinating. So nothing else changed about how you felt about them going, about how you felt about or thought about maybe the person she was with. And none of the circumstances changed.
No,
He just said she has to go. You had deep level of peace, and
that
you
is
went
exactly
right
what
off to
happened.
sleep. That is pretty awesome. So how did
Yeah.
that play out? Do you mind if I ask? Like, what, you woke up the next morning and were you in a great mood? Where you're like, okay, I'll help you pack. I mean, what happened in the next, how that played out the next day or two?
I don't know that I would say great mood, but I did go help them pack. So,
Hey,
I mean,
awesome.
she's my daughter. And so I did. I went and helped them pack, and my son and I
Amen.
loaded up the truck. And, of course, as a mom, like, there was
Mm,
still that human part of me of, like, really not wanting my daughter to go, and not just out of, you know, even though she had been prodigal at the time, we were still pretty close. And so I knew I was
yeah,
going to miss her. It was sad, that kind of thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
So fast forward, um, would you be willing to share kind of what transpired? You can be as vague or specific as you'd like. I know
Sure.
that's your daughter's life, so whatever you're permitted to share, would you be willing to
Yes.
share kind of the next steps, like what happened?
Yes. So we had been in, I didn't really talk to her very much the first few days that she was gone. But as we got closer to the end of that next week, we were having more and more conversations. And she had shared some things with me that were really bothering her. And, without going into too much detail, there were two specific incidences that kind of scared her. And the one that finally did it, she was, well, just to say, she was gone 10 days, total of 10 days before she called me. And they had a pretty strong disagreement. There were some things that were not okay. And he basically challenged her in that she, wouldn't ask mom and dad for help. And she tried to explain to him, you don't understand the relationship that I have with my parents. If I ask them to come get me, they will. And he just basically said, I bet you won't do that. And so she did. And while we were on the phone, she said, Mom, come get me. And I said, okay, this was a Saturday night. And we left very early that next morning to go get her.
So she called you like after 10 days. That's all it took. Like she got there, some level of realization took place. And within 10, 11, I mean, that sounds like a pretty short period of time.
It was a very short period of time. I was very surprised by it. This is the way that God works sometimes. And I say this all the time. God doesn't surprise me anymore, but he still continues to blow my mind. So, because I've seen him do stuff like this so many times.
That's just what it's like to be a believer. It's like you keep getting shocked and surprised, but you know, and you have faith. And
yes,
so, yeah,
yes.
It kind of makes it
so,
fun.
Yeah.
The adventure with the Lord.
And I think for her, it was a lot of times Christian kids growing up in Christian homes, they're in pretty safe environments. They don't really experience the harshness of the world until they kind of get out on their own. And that's pretty much what happened to her. She was like, oh, I'm 9 hours away from pretty much everybody that cares for me, minimum 9 hours away. And she had a reality check. And I think that that's a large part of kind of what started her process back toward the Lord, because she now does walk with the Lord as well.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah. So, but it was a huge God moment again in my life personally that's still impacting me today. You have those stake in the ground moments of your relationship with the Lord of like, something changed inside of you. And this was one of those. And it was another big one where his faithfulness, there's nothing else like in it, and it's not dependent on us. It is who he is, and it's his nature. And watching him be faithful in that situation, even before he brought her home, of communicating with me, she has to go. And knowing that the Lord, like my God, my King that I love and that I serve and that's been so faithful to me, knows where my daughter is and he's with her. Even when she was a prodigal, like it just brings so much peace and comfort. And I was able to trust that because of his faithfulness to me my whole life.
Wow.
So
that's kind of a big one, especially with your kiddos.
Yeah, because there is no pain like kid pain. Like there's just not.
I feel you. Yeah, I have some of that myself. So obviously the name of the ministry is Stacking Stones. It's based on Joshua 4, and it's about giving testimony of what the Lord has done. So your kids, if they were to watch this, like what would you, if you had there's something you could share with them, what would you want to encourage them or give them wisdom or advice, like, just maybe as a follow-up of this testimony of hearing God?
Absolutely, that he is such a big supernatural God that we really can't wrap our minds around, and that he is trustworthy. And the second part of that, when she called me, we didn't come right away. We came that next morning. And so that meant a 9-hour drive, and watching him, we didn't know that my husband's nephew was an hour and a half away from her. And he called her that morning that we were driving to come get her and said, hey, I'm off today. Let's hang out. And so the Lord provided for her somebody there to keep her from being talked out of coming home. And we didn't know that. Like, he totally set that whole scenario up because that's what he does. And
Nice.
that he's always working. He's always working on our behalf. And to thank him for what he's doing that we can see, and to thank him for what he's doing that we can't.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good word. That's a good word. Love that.
Mhm.
Love that. Great encouragement. Yeah, we thank our God daily for the blessings we do see and the blessings we can't see. That's kind of a regular thing we did with our kids growing up. So,
Yeah.
because my guess is there's a whole bunch of blessings that we don't see him
Yeah.
working, as
Exactly.
as he is. So, wonderful, wonderful. That was really awesome. Thank you for sharing. I love to hear just God moments and how that shifts us in such a way,
Mhm.
especially in your situation. Nothing really changed. None of the circumstances changed, but that word and the peace, boom. And
Yep.
you probably slept like a baby,
I
So,
did. I totally did.
yeah, I love that. Well, thank you very much, Michelle. I certainly appreciate you coming on. Love that your walk with the Lord, and I just also, if you could just extend our gratitude to your daughter for allowing you to share the testimony. It's pretty awesome that she's willing to let you give testimony of the Lord and how He moved in your life and even
Yes.
blessed. So love that, love that. Thank you so much. Appreciate you coming on the show, and maybe we'll have you back because I know you told me quite a few God moments that you had.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
all right. Take care. Take care. Thanks,
Thank you.
Michelle.
All
See y'all. Bye bye now.
right. Bye.
If you would like to give a testimony of hearing God or seeing a miracle, we would love to hear from you. We invite you to pray and ask the Lord if this is a time for you to share that testimony. And if it is, we would love to hear from you. Please email us. Our email is info@stackingstones.life. Info@stackingstones.life. We just pray that the testimony of Jesus will encourage you to pursue him even more. God bless you.